Hi guys, this is Seishu from Tiffinbox, and this is another edition of Tiffincast. Today we have the CEO of PhotoShelter, a wonderful online application, and online service for photographers. And I'd like to welcome Alan. Thanks for joining us, Alan.
Thanks for having me.
Well, one of the things I was very curious about is that you started PhotoShelter with a couple other guys like Grover, right?
Yep.
And you came up with the idea of helping photographers really create websites for photographers. Was that the main goal?
Yeah, initially when we started, we were more concerned about creating basically cloud storage for photographers. It was 2005. It was a time when a lot of people had kind of moved en masse into digital. And a lot of the photographers that we spoke to didn't really know what to do with all of these files and how to distribute them, etc. So it started off as kind of a back end workflow tool archive, but then over the years it became obvious that integration into a website and providing a photography website would be key because that's how we communicate online of who we are. So that's kind of the service. It evolved in tandem, but there's every photographer on the service gets a website, and they also get all of the e-commerce and storage and file distribution capabilities.
Terrific. Um, what is, in your opinion, the current state of affairs with photography, and how do you feel PhotoShelter will plays a part in it?
I think on the one hand, you could say things are really depressing, and I think that the people who take that viewpoint the most are the ones who kind of grew up in the 80s and 90s, and particularly, for example, the stock shooters in the 80s, who had a very specialized skill and had equipment that had a lot of costs associated with it, were making a lot of money back in those times. And now that everyone has a camera, this has been written up ad nauseum, but everybody has a camera. The cost of content creation, whether it's photography, video, text, etc., it's come so low. It really has commoditized photography. So in that sense, it's kind of depressing because the fees that you used to command, you're no longer command. On the other hand, I think we're in a really interesting transitionary point, and I don't mean that in a superfluous and like cute way either. I think it's really interesting to see how photos are being used. I still think there's a lot of power in that, and therefore the way that we're going to be using photography and the way that we're going to be monetizing photography in the future, those decisions are still being made today. And so I think for the people who are embracing things like social media, who are embracing kind of marketing, they're going to find that they're going to be more successful. And so the way that PhotoShelter sort of fits in with that, we're trying to position ourselves to provide the tools that allow photographers to say, okay, first I'm going to throw my images up online. But beyond that, we also know that having a Facebook like button on every page is important because it's a touch point with the customer that then takes you from your website to Facebook, where there are 800 million people. Potentially, that's your audience there. So figuring out how to disseminate all of this information and these photos in other places, as well as maintain your own website, is kind of the opportunity right now. And I think people who are doing it really well are actually succeeding in a really nice way.
You touched on having a Facebook like button on every page.
Yeah.
Um, you know, what 3 weeks ago, Google just came out with Google Plus.
Yep.
Are you going to be incorporating Google Plus into your pages as well?
We will indeed. We would love to embrace these things immediately, but you never know. I mean, Google has had some failures.
Yes. Yes.
So for us to go out and then I'll just add +1 to everybody's pages and then have it, blow up a month later, that's one issue. And then the other issue is like you're looking at the page and you could clutter up every single social network and button, 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 and all of a sudden the photo becomes subordinate to everything else on the page. So I think there are usability and interaction concerns that prevent us from just jumping on the bandwagon and adding the button immediately. But that will definitely be coming.
Thank you. Um, when you started out, there was another company called Digital Railroad.
Yeah.
Um, now, that company didn't last very long. With its demise, which, as I've already mentioned, it's a service similar to yours. It's almost the same idea, practically. Um, PhotoShelter became almost the obvious choice, right, for photographers or professionals. But then came Zenfolio and Pictage and a whole other companies since even Pictage came into existence.
Yep.
How is PhotoShelter different from the rest of the pack?
I think each company has kind of their niche that they're focused on. So Pictage, for example, most people know them in the wedding industry, and it's something that they've created a product that's very specific to the way that wedding photographers work. Now, the casual observer would say, how different is wedding photography from portrait photography or event photography? Turns out they're very different, and the concerns that people have are very, very different. PhotoShelter has tried to build more of a generalized tool to help you succeed in photography. It might not be the best tool for the wedding photographers. And so in that respect, it's nice because you do have some choice depending on how niche you want to get. I will say that most photographers that we run into nowadays are not specializing in one type of photography. So I think in that sense, having a more generalized tool can be helpful because you might be shooting an event today, but you might want to sell stock tomorrow. Now, the other flip side of that, is that I think photographers should use as many tools as they can manage appropriately. And if you have a wedding business and Pictage works great for that, then use Pictage. If you have a need for PhotoShelter, then use that. If you have a need for a portfolio website, one that displays, images that are as large as your screen, then use that. Because every customer that you run into, every addressable market is going to have different needs, and no one tool is really going to capture that properly. So if you can be on Facebook, if you can be on Twitter, if you can be on PhotoShelter, if you can be on Vimeo and YouTube, you should be in all of those places. That's part of the marketing game that we're in right now.
Got it. Okay. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a Pictage user, mostly because I'm a wedding photographer.
Yeah.
But I also shoot portraits, and Pictage allows me to host, portraits as well. So it's worked out fine for me. But I'll be honest with you, I've been a bit overwhelmed by what PhotoShelter offers photographers. I get the emails every month about what your new offerings are.
Yep.
And what do you say to people like me who are kind of like want to get into PhotoShelter, but are like, I don't know. What do you say to people like?
It's
like
a
me?
great question because I think the feeling that people get from when they initially log into PhotoShelter is sort of like when you launch Photoshop for the first time, which is, I know this thing is very powerful because I know friends who are using it and friends who are succeeding with it, but I have no idea where to start because there's all these buttons and menus and da 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 da. We have a responsibility as the creators of the service to make it more usable. And that's something that we've really been focused on in the past year. All of the releases have really been, how do we make this more usable? Because it's been several years of just stacking feature upon feature. And at some point, as product designers and usability designers, we have to take a step back and say, okay, you've got 4 dozen features, but they don't work as well as they should. So there's a responsibility on our side to make sure that it's as easy to use as possible and as easy to understand and comprehend as possible. The flip side of that is there's a responsibility of the photographer to understand what types of tools are out there to help them succeed. And if you are a photographer who's using a digital camera and you're trying to create a market for yourself online and you're new to this, then you ought to be embracing as many tools as possible that help you succeed. Now, we know not only anecdotally, but factually, we know that people are succeeding making tens of thousands of dollars through PhotoShelter or managing their businesses with PhotoShelter. If those are the types of applications you need for your workflow, then I think it behooves photographers to say, hey, how can PhotoShelter or a service similar to PhotoShelter help me? It's so typical to still, even this day, hear photographers that just say, I just want to throw a few of my best images up online. And that to me is so silly, because there's so many opportunities. When you think about how difficult it is to get someone to come to your website, if you don't have e-commerce that's unattended, where at 2 a.m. at night I can order a mouse pad or an 8x10 just because I felt like it, because I'm an impulse buyer, then you've lost a potential customer. So showing the image just by itself isn't good enough. It's not going to help you succeed online. So we're trying to get photographers to embrace this notion of, hey, the effort to put it online is only incrementally less than to put it online and price it for sale. Because we have all of the automated print and fulfillment and shipping, all that stuff is done for you already. Just enable it.
Great answer. I love it. One thing that you have in common with Pictage, I would say, is that you're very, very keen on educating your clients.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I've just been blown away by the kind of effort you guys have put into each of the ebooks and the guidebooks that you've created. Titles like Selling Fine Art Photography, which I think was the latest one that you
Yeah.
had, to something like starting a photography business for, new photographers who wanted to get the first steps that they would have to take to start a business. Why is it important for PhotoShelter to get into the content marketing game? I mean, is it simply a value add for you guys, or do you feel like, you're doing your good deed for the community, or what's the rationale?
I think it's a little bit of both. The first guide that we put out was probably about 3 years ago, I want to say. And it was a survey of photo buyers. And we got all of this valuable information because, too often we find that photographers are educating photographers, and we're not really talking to who our audience is per se. So we did this survey and we put it out there, and we got a really great response from people. And we said, you know what? Not only is this great for the brand because people associate education with PhotoShelter, but it's great for the industry because if we can get 20,000, 50,000 people reading these things and seeing eye to eye on some of the common issues and understanding what's going on in photography, that can only hopefully elevate everything from, like, you're not undercutting your neighbor, you're figuring out the best way to use social media, you understand what search engine optimization is and why that's a factor in selecting a website, etc. So I think it's mutually beneficial both for the people who are reading it as well as our company.
Last question: are you guys going to be at PPE again this year with the chimichanga truck?
We've found we're not, and the reason why is we found sort of diminishing returns over the years. And I think when you talk to a lot of businesses about trade shows in general, it's so expensive to attend a trade show. And so if we talk about marketing and how photographers can deploy their resources against marketing, it's the same challenge that we have as a business. To attend a trade show, they charge you $8,000 for the booth or whatever it is. Then you have to spend the money to dress up the booth. So you're spending maybe another $5,000 to $10,000 on the display. And you take 8 people out of your office for 3 days. So those are, 24-man days, basically. And how many people can you realistically have good conversations with? Maybe 200 to 300. So the math doesn't really work out versus if we're able to do a great interview with your audience, reach your audience. If we do a nice webinar with a buyer, we can literally reach 2,000 people with one person sitting in the office with a headset. And so I encourage, that same sort of thought, I encourage photographers to think about, like, what's the return on investment? You think because you're spending all day on Twitter that you're actually getting results. But have you looked at your Google Analytics to understand how many people are actually coming to your site? What's the ROI on that time, that sort of time and resource commitment? So all of the same things that we're sort of preaching in these educational guides, we try to do for ourselves. And I think it makes it a little more tangible and more real when we go out and we speak to people. But the shorter answer is no burger truck, no chimichangas, and we won't be at PPE, but we'll be around at the various events talking to people.
Lovely. Again, Alan, thank you so much for making the time. If folks have questions for you, I'm sure you'll see it underneath in the comments section.
Absolutely.
I hope you'll come back and answer them, and feel free to let other people know about Tiffinbox as well. It's a great website that I'm trying to develop for photographers so that they can come back and learn more about what's available for them in the industry. So thank you so much for your time again.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.